All right, guys. Well, I just got finished watching the Twisted Metal first season last night, and I'm happy to say that overall I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty great, like not incredible or anything, but I thought it was an enjoyable show overall, and I'll get into that. I'll break down my review after the intro. All right, guys. Well, don't forget to like and subscribe. And yes, just last night I finished watching the first season of Twisted Metal, and was very. I was actually. I think it exceeded my expectations. To be honest, I'm gonna try to do this in like parts, so I don't just ramble. Like try to break up my review in certain areas, like just the story and just characters, blah blah blah. So with that, I'll just start with the story. Considering this is based on the Twisted Metal video game series, there isn't a whole lot of story to go on. There's really more the characters, especially Sweet Tooth, of course. Sweet Tooth is kind of like the, main antagonist in the entire Twisted Metal series, and he's on all the boxes usually. So, but I mean, they use names from people in the game, but story wise, I don't know how close because I don't know the games to know if there was any story from that series to put in a show. But I mean, I was the story was like, I mean, I really don't know what the Twisted Metal game story is like, and I suppose I could look it up for the sake of the review, but I don't think I should. I don't want to do anything to like affect how I review it. But I'm imagining that most of the story was kind of just made up for the show, and I mean, it kind of works, even though it's not all that original. I mean, clearly, I'm going to be spoiling a lot of things, but I mean, it was pretty obvious to me that Nev Campbell's character had bad intentions from the get go. It was pretty obvious. Then, of course, they showed that at the end of first episode, episode one, I was right. But there is a pretty cool reveal later that I didn't really see coming, so I won't spoil that one just to be nice. But near the end of the season, there's a reveal, and it's pretty cool. But the story doesn't do anything out of the ordinary or like have a mind blowing like twist or whatever. But I mean, the season ends with a cliffhanger, so I'm thinking they're gonna have. I mean, I guess they're planning on having a season two. Whether that works out for them or not, I don't know. But they've already got enough cliffhangers, not just the main one, but the fact that John Doe still doesn't know his real name and all that stuff. Like, so there'll be a lot more of him probably trying to figure out his backstory. So yeah, and then midway through the first episode, you meet Quiet because she doesn't say anything, and John, when he meets her, decides to call her Quiet. And Stephanie Beatriz, I believe that's how you say her name. I only know her from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I don't know her from anything else she's ever been in. So I just know her as that very stoic, woman from Brooklyn Nine-Nine who, she was a fun character. I mean, I liked her. I mean, I didn't watch the show that much. I watched, I think, the first season or a couple seasons, and it was funny, good show. But then I saw her on this, and I was thinking, well, this is just the same character. She's playing another, just always in a bad mood type character. But that's not the case at all, which is good. But I'll get more into that later. And yeah, the first episode sets up a lot of things like as the first episode would. It sets up a lot of things for the rest of the season. And Sweet Tooth, of course, was just good fun. I mean, he's a total psychopath, but the combination of Samoa Joe doing the action and Will Arnett's voice worked out pretty well. I'm wondering if how they did that. Did he know the dialogue while he was acting out that stuff, or was he saying it, or I don't know. It'd be interesting to know how that worked out. I mean, the story really doesn't go all that crazy. Like the story doesn't really do anything. The story itself doesn't really do anything all that unique. I mean, these two side characters that kind of end up being added to the crew, like two guys that escaped or something. They were basically like they're basically recruited by Stone. He's like the main antagonist, and they come over to his side and stuff like that. But I mean, their whole journey is pretty interesting too. For like characters you'd say are side characters, they go on a pretty interesting journey themselves. So I'm amazed at how I'm really impressed. Not amazed, but impressed by how well-rounded the characters are, and they're not just really like carbon copies of their characters from the game, the ones that who are in the game. I do know that Quiet isn't a character in the game, so she was created for the show. So a lot of, I mean, they would have taken a lot of liberties on that series to make it into to the game to make it into a show. But Sweet Tooth is like just enjoyable. I mean, Samoa Joe has a great presence, and I'm curious to know that if he was on set, was he saying the dialogue too, or was Will Arnett there off side saying it to him, or did he just do all the actions and then they added the voice in later, or they recorded the voice first? I don't know. I'm interested in that, but I mean, he's a wrestler. He's a professional wrestler, so he would already be good at movements and physicality, and he was really good at that part. I mean. I do feel like Will Arnett's voice. It did seem like Will Arnett's voice didn't sound like it was actually just there behind the mask. It really just sounded like kind of a recording of Will Arnett's voice. I don't know why they couldn't just try to make it sound better. That's one thing that I thought was a little weak. Was how Will Arnett's voice sounded out of like on when it was supposed to be on scene. It just didn't sound very clear.
I think one of the more pleasant. I mean, this whole show was kind of a pleasant surprise because I really wasn't expecting that much from it, but it exceeded what I was thinking with the story and the action. Well, the action I figured would be pretty good, but the story development, the character development is actually what impresses me the most because they actually managed to make these characters all well-rounded. Even the characters they just created for the show, like Quiet, and then Stu and Mike, the two like guys who were guards, kind of unsure of where their place, and Stu is very reluctant to be like a bad guy, and he kind of switches sides a lot. So it's kind of a surprising amount of character development between characters they made up for the show. Like Stu is, doesn't want to be a bad guy, but he does it just basically to fit in, or because his friend Mike does it. Mike, his friend, like goes all in and straight up just killing people, but Stu's like doesn't really want to do it. So that was a really that's a really not unsuspected like side story through another character that they straight up just made for the show that worked out really well, I thought. And then you have Mike, who's like Stu's friend. They've been friends for life, but he kind of just went with Stone's side just to survive and get along. But he's kind of embraced it more. He embraced it more than Stu did, and intentionally, we don't really know if he did that because he wanted to or just out of survival. But my favorite part of the entire series actually was the development of the relationship between John Doe and Quiet. I mean, it's been done a million times. People don't like each other at first, they hate each other, and then by the end, they're basically in love. And between Quiet and John Doe, it was really well developed. I mean, Doe was open to kind of being friends immediately because of how lonely he is, but Quiet was a lot more reluctant because she's kind of like afraid to get close to someone because of what happened with her brother, and she's also just kind of a hardened individual and harder to break through, but eventually she loosens up and softens up. And John, and and on the show itself, Anthony Mackie and Stephanie Beatriz had really great chemistry, and again, not right away, kind of like you would in real life with someone. But near the end of the show, their chemistry was really good, which I'm sure is a thing that kind of developed as the show went along, and they got closer as actors and friends, maybe. But for me personally, I think that was actually the strongest part of the entire show was the relationship development between John Doe and Quiet. But I also enjoy like the goofiness of it all as well. Like you can't take something like this too seriously. A show in an apocalyptic setting with guns with machine guns on them, cars with machine guns on them. And the part here where they're in the theater and it's like she's never seen a movie on a big screen ever, and amazingly they're able to just watch a movie with popcorn sitting around that for some reason they eat, even though it's been there for who knows how long, which is kind of weird. But also like the development between like the relationship was like up and down. Like they have a great moment, and then the moment is destroyed. Like right here, where John Doe thinks he's doing something nice, and she washes her brother's coat, and it really pisses her off. And then of course they have an argument, they get over it, and then they fight again. So they're really up and down a lot. But that actually helped. I mean, it almost got a little bit much after a while, where it's constantly like, okay, they're good again, they're good, now they're not good. A lot of times it's because of her being pissed at him, but sometimes he'd be pissed at her. It's so gross. And you also go back to Quiet's brother, who in the first episode died. He basically killed him. He killed himself to save her. He didn't. That's not what basically happened. That's what happened. But later in the show, she's kind of arguing with her imagination of him. And that happened throughout the series, off and on. It didn't happen that much. I kind of thought it would happen a bit more, and they would involve this guy a lot more because he's kind of fun and wacky as a character and makes, his sister smile. But again, with Sweet Tooth, I mean, he was really a scene stealer. Every scene he was in, he really just made it funnier, but also like he's definitely a psycho. But I think Samoa Joe really sold it. Like he needs to get more credit for how well he basically played this character physically, which can't be that easy to do when someone else is voicing the character. Then halfway through the season, they go back to before they were free, and they're basically like they got into this society where they thought everything would be better, but instead they're basically like slaves who get to live, but they live a horrible life, and they can only they get to live, but they're essentially someone's slave, and actually parts of them gets cut off, which is kind of gross. Like the messed up, it's kind of gross part of the show to like see these people with parts of their body missing, and rich people just wear fingers and ears around their neck. Then midpoint of the season, John Doe and Quiet actually hook up, which I was surprised they went that far with it, but then they got a little silly with it, with where it went. And like usual, one is more into the other. Doe is more into her. And it's almost not even too sure why she went that far with it. It could have just been pure loneliness, because it was hard to discern her motivations in the end, because her brother was gone. Where else was she trying to do? But eventually she decides to go with John to New San Diego or whatever it is, to this quote-unquote utopia that they think they're going to go live in. Then they hooked up again in the ball pit, both times, which is pretty funny to do it in the ball pit. That was a funny moment as well, just to do that. Take this standard moment of people hooking up, but have it in a ball pit. That's just funny. In the show, I was kind of surprised at how long it kind of took to give more backstory for John Doe. Like, we don't know a whole lot about him even by the end of the series, other than, he's a milkman, he's been doing it for years, and he's good at it, and then he has a relationship with this girl who we meet later on, and she's kind of up and down. We almost can't even tell if she's good or bad or indifferent. But we learn more about John and his past, and there is an episode where we see him as a child and when everything first went down, and how he discovered his car Evelyn, which is like his great love. Well, we even get a backstory on Sweet Tooth, and there's a beginning of an episode where he was apparently a child actor who lost his mind and killed his co-star, who was a dog. He was jealous that the dog was more popular than him. So there is a surprising amount, a great amount of backstory and character development for everyone in the show. Again, this is probably the biggest surprise overall. Yeah, later in, by episode 8, we're getting more of a backstory about John Doe and how he lost his parents, and then he ended up living in the Evelyn car that somehow magically, when he needs it to finally drive, he does. But we learn more about why John is so protective and loving of his car. Essentially been his best friend his entire life. But then it's almost kind of sad at the end when he loses the car, it actually blows up and it's destroyed beyond repair. And it's actually, there's surprisingly emotional moments here that are actually a little, as the show progresses, it keeps going, and I feel like they almost could have dropped 1 or 2 episodes, because it was really all about just getting across the country to New San Diego, but they keep kind of getting off track, deviated. It was almost getting a little long in the tooth with like how many more, barriers could there be to them getting to where they need to go. But Evelyn got stolen by the Holy Men or something, and then so obviously he had to get him back, but then John Doe basically had the decision to save the car or go with Quiet to where she's headed, and he chose the car. Ultimately, the whole area blows up, and she thinks that he died. So then the episode ends with her thinking that another person that she got close to died, and basically everyone she gets close to dies. More and more progression with the story, and there's also a cool moment where they connect with these kind of warriors who are who live in a little convoy, and they're always constantly moving. They're kind of a part of the story, and again, I don't know if this is something that's in the game or not, but they become part of this kind of convoy that stays kind of safe by always moving, which is pretty smart. And of course, another fight between John Doe and Quiet, where she's mad at him or he's mad at her, and then they eventually make up again. And then once when you finally think that you forget about Sweet Tooth even being around, he shows up just as there's a big ambush for John Doe and Quiet. Well, Sweet Tooth is like a hard character to define because he's not good, but he in the end helps out the heroes and is in a way kind of a hero in himself. But I did like, I mean, I know enough about the Twisted Metal series to know, or first off, how big a part of Sweet Tooth is, but moments where this covers, I think there's pretty much, I'm pretty sure there's game covers of him with his head on fire. So they added that to the show, even though it almost doesn't. He's just driving around in a car. His head doesn't need to be on fire, but he's a unusual character because he's not good, but deep down, he's just a hurt little kid, and he just wants to have friends. So that's like a surprisingly deep, backstory for him as well. He's also, a maniac and jumps out of moving vehicles to like smash through windows. Yeah, this moment here where they show Sweet Tooth's mask, but they also show the bag. That bag was some kind of thing that Sweet Tooth carried around called Harold, and I forget if they mentioned earlier in the show who Harold was for him, but I don't think they ever clarified that. So someone from his past, we don't even know the bag that ever opened it, so he was carrying that around with him. Someone, maybe an old friend, his only friend, parts of it, but they never revealed that completely as to what that's about. Of course, when John Doe gets to San Diego and he's talking with Raven, it's revealed that this big, promise that he was going to get isn't really a promise, and she already knew. I mean, Quiet was suspecting that she was going to get screwed over again like she did with the other thing with her brother. And then she just kind of doesn't turn on John Doe again. She does something that seems awful, but in the end it's for both their own goods in a way. Basically, this entire job was just a test to see if he could do it, because he's only bringing ice cream across. But then I think the big kind of twist reveal in a way was that, this entire town is not really real, and literally everyone in it is an actor. All the people saying hi to him, being friendly, making him think that he has the most idyllic, perfect life. Does he even have a job? I don't know. And then we learn that all these people are just hired actors who want John to think that this world is great. Like everything is fake, even the date he goes on with. So all of this was essentially just a test by Raven, who wants to hire him as his permanent person or driver, but Doe wants to leave, but she doesn't want that to happen. Then she goes as far as to showing him the house that he grew up in, which may or may not be real. We don't know yet. Could just be a fake house, or a house built to look like his old house, or she just thinks he won't remember enough to discern if it's his house or not. But we do get more of a backstory about him and the fact that he had a family and a sister. Again, who knows if that really is what they were to him, because they're not really clear on that. But then she has some more photos, but I mean, there's nothing. Everything about what she's doing just seems to have an evil to it, and that she's not who she says she is or what she's trying to achieve with him. But we're not going to learn about that until next season, if there is, in fact, a season 2. Then we kind of learn her ultimate plan was to have John Doe take part in this twisted metal. Like they actually used the word twisted metal to describe this contest between all the main characters we met in this season. So season 2 could be a lot of that, just the actual gun, car, literally the game itself kind of on screen with people driving around in a stadium of some sort maybe, or it could be out on the land. Well, we won't know. But there's just so many setups for season 2 that if they didn't have a season 2, it'd be kind of ridiculous. I mean, they seem confident that they're going to have one, but there hasn't been any official announcements yet that I'm aware of. But they set up a lot of what's going to happen in season 2. And then the entire season ends with Quiet being surrounded by all these new army of people led by John Doe's sister, who we don't get to see her face, but it straight up ends with that's how the entire season ends. So I think if I had to sum up my entire review of this season 1 of Twisted Metal with one word, I would say surprising. Just surprising with how well developed the characters were. Anthony Mackie didn't necessarily have that much of a range, but I still liked him. You know, he's not a bad actor. I've always liked him, considering everything that I've seen him in before this was MCU. Like, I haven't seen him in anything other than the MCU in like several years. So it's hard to disconnect him from his Falcon character. They didn't change how he looks at all. They could have given him a scar or something maybe. But I mean, it's really surprising the chemistry between him, Anthony Mackie, and Stephanie Beatriz, I thought was excellent, really. It developed organically like you would with two strangers. It was the strongest part of the show overall. And Stephanie Beatriz was great. She kind of was half who she was in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but then opened up a bit more near the end. I guess maybe the weakest character for me would have been Thomas Hayden Church, and it's just, you know, the bad guy who's the bad guy but thinks he's doing right kind of thing. Not really a stretch there. Then I guess it was also surprising at how well developed and well-rounded Sweet Tooth was, and Samoa Joe's performance, I think, deserves a nod for how great he was at just kind of physically embodying a character with the voice being played by someone else. But he must have said the dialogue on set just to see his mouth moving, because it would be weird if he basically wasn't really saying anything, even though we hear words coming out. But the audio for Will Arnett's voice I thought could be better, so it would sound more like he's behind the mask. It really did just kind of sound like a recording. It just sounded like a recording, and it was kind of not well done, I thought. I liked the show more than I expected that I would. I mean, is it up there with The Last of Us? Of course not, but it just goes to show that video game adaptations are getting way, way better, and they take a really obscure game that you'd think wouldn't work, and it worked. I mean, they essentially made an entire new story over the Twisted Metal universe, and there wasn't that much twisted metally in it. The vehicles with the guns is essentially what the whole series is about, so there isn't that much in it, but I could see there being a lot more of it in season 2. But I mean, I am more interested in this show now and where it could go and what they could do with the characters and the story, and how John Doe and Quiet will eventually reconnect, because of course they will. There's actually a post-credit scene that I'm only just seeing now, but it's of Stu and Mike, who seem to have gotten away from all the trouble, and they're hanging out on a beach somewhere with mannequins and eating hot dogs. But then, like I suspected, Sweet Tooth didn't die. He's somehow alive, and now he shows up to wherever they are somehow, and decides to kill Mike and drag Stu away. I guess he considered Stu a friend of some sort, and Stu sided with him, but it seemed more it was out of survival. But so yeah, that's how they decided to end the entire series, with a post-credit scene of Sweet Tooth coming back, which I thought they could save for next season, because we all knew that Sweet Tooth wasn't really dead. Someone like that doesn't just die off in one season. He's too exciting and interesting. But it was surprisingly, more than anything, was how well developed the characters were. The show really surprised me, but I'm also just glad that it's good. I wasn't expecting it to be as good as it turned out to be, but another, notch on the belt of the year that is 2023, and the really great selection of video game adaptations we're getting. First, with The Last of Us, and then Super Mario being one of the biggest movies of the year. So this is really exciting, and I can't wait to see where season 2 goes. But that is my review of the Twisted Metal series that just played on Peacock. It came out on July 27th, so it's a week or so later, but I couldn't have time to review it. There's actually a post-credit scene that I'm only just seeing now, but it's of Stu and Mike, who seem to have gotten away from all the trouble, and they're hanging out on a beach somewhere with mannequins and eating hot dogs. But then, like I suspected, Sweet Tooth didn't die. He's somehow alive, and now he shows up to wherever they are somehow, and decides to kill Mike and drag Stu away. I guess he considered Stu a friend of some sort, and Stu sided with him, but it seemed more it was out of survival. But so yeah, that's how they decided to end the entire series, with a post-credit scene of Sweet Tooth coming back, which I thought they could save for next season, because we all knew that Sweet Tooth wasn't really dead. Someone like that doesn't just die off in one season. He's too exciting and interesting. But I guess that is all I have for now on the review of the surprisingly good season 1 of Twisted Metal. I'm interested to see where season 2 will go, but we'll have to see if there will be one for sure. I mean, there should be, with the amount of setups there were. But I really like this show, and I'm glad it's good, and I would love for you to tell me what you think of this season, and did you like it? Did you hate it? Were you surprised? Do you know the series at all for Twisted Metal, and do you like what they did with it to make it work as a show? Overall, I'm just really surprised, but glad at how good this was. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and keep gaming.